say the number that it's, how high? We're just talking about how you call for slides. It's all back-end stuff, real deep knowledge type stuff. Welcome everybody to this panel. It's called The World in 2025. My name is Brian Sullivan. I'm the moderator of this thing, and we've got an hour together. It's going to be great. Although I will say this is going to be the weirdest panel I've probably ever done in my over 10 years of coming to the Milken Conference, because we've got these amazing panelists, but they have nothing in common. No. Except that they all hope to be alive in the year 2025. And the fact that we put this panel together signals to me that there will be a world 10 years from now, so that it by itself is an optimistic way to start.
Yep.
Let us go through this list here. We'll start, and I'll just quickly boogie down. We got Karen Harris to my far left here. You're right, Director of Macro Trends at Bain & Company. Carrie Kalaja, did I get that right?
No, but we'll go with it.
Vice, what's the exact pronunciation?
It's Kolaje.
Kolaje. I wasn't even close. But thank you for not making me feel stupid, Carrie. Question's gonna be really, why is PayPal so great? Here's your opening question. Vice President of Global Consumer Products at PayPal. We've got Pablo Legorreta, founder and CEO of Royalty Farm.
Good pronunciation.
Thank you.
Look at that.
Muchas gracias. We've got Strive Masiwa. Did I get that right, Strive? Sure. Thank you. I just came from a totally different panel. Founder and chairman of EcoNet Wireless. And I finally got this right after about 10 years, Jim McCawken.
I will answer to that.
It doesn't look, I don't know, how do you get McCawken out of that?
It's just fine. You did well.
Thank you very much. CEO, Principal Global Investors, President, Global Asset Management, Principal Financial Group. Now there's only 6 minutes left in the panel. I was scaring Carrie in the ready room, but you're gonna be fine. We're gonna have a good time. We're gonna talk about the future. Strive, so let's start with you. We've talked a lot about sub-Saharan Africa at the Milken Conference already. The GNP growth is spectacular there. We've talked about banking opportunities. As you look out 10 years, anywhere, sub-Saharan Africa or the world, what do you see? How connected are we gonna be?
Thank you very much. Well, it sounds like very far away, but it actually isn't. It's just the pace of change has so accelerated that what takes place in a year is what used to take place in 10 years. But if we really are to project ourselves 10 years on, I like to look at what happened in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, I guess Google was in diapers. Microsoft was almost omnipresent. So there will be another great Google. Mm-hmm. There will be a great Skype. But I think you'll begin to see them not just coming out of the United States. You are going to see Amazons, where we've already seen Alibaba come out of China. Mm-hmm. Expect to see that come out of Africa too, and Latin America, and regions of the world that you haven't been used to see great innovations and great new thinking in terms of innovation.
Is it possible the biggest company in the world in 2025 may not even exist right now? Could a company scale that quickly?
I would be surprised if it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. The reality of the last 10 years, given the pace that the next 10 years will be even faster, is that you will see companies that will emerge in 10 years that you don't even know today. That will be the biggest companies.
Will you own it? Will it be your company?
I absolutely hope so, and I hope you'll invest.
We'll talk after the meeting.
Okay.
Carrie, will money exist in 2025?
Well, let's talk about what money is. So money.
You're throwing the questions back.
I am.
Fantastic.
No, I had a lot of time to think about this. I mean, we think about money as bills and credit cards and coins, and the reality is it's a system. Mm-hmm. And it's a system in which value is exchanged between a buyer and a seller or between two people. And so will the system exist? Absolutely. Will the system be transformed? I mean, we absolutely think that as well. I mean, we just sat on a panel or in a roundtable with Strive, and we talked about the fundamental change that's happening with global borders being knocked down and disappearing, and people being able to participate in the global economy that never could before. And the money and the system of money is enabling that to happen, and it's doing it for people who have not traditionally been partnerships or had bank accounts with financial institutions. We're doing it with carriers and with alternative forms of institutions that move money, and so I absolutely think it will be there. What it will look like, will it become digitized? I think you and I have had a debate about that. We're starting to see that cash that runs through consumers' wallets globally, have gone downwards to 40%, and they're looking at a 25% decrease in cash flowing through people's wallets in the next 2 years. So Sweden is not even issuing money anymore from their banks. So the signals are there around the world that it's starting to change.
Volvos are also now built in China.
That's right.
Things do change. So
Things do
we can,
change.
I think we've established so far in the panel that things will change
Yep.
by 2025. So how about this? Will that access to capital that some people may not have, thanks to you, and perhaps, right, in some regions of the world where it's just on their phone or whatever device we're using in 2025, we'll get into that. Will that enable the continuation? Last year we talked about how clean water is bringing people out of poverty because it's decreasing their health spending. Will this lift the world's GDP? Will there be a functional aspect, more access to capital?
You're already starting to see it, and you're
Do you have any
starting.
examples?
Well, I mean, PayPal does this, and I know that there's some carriers who are doing it as well, where effectively, instead of going and looking at a credit score, we're looking at the behaviors in which consumers as well as business have built their business in issuing cash and loans and credit in order for them to grow. And whether it's peer-to-peer lending or it's crowdsourcing or it's alternative forms of financing, credit is being issued in very different ways. In fact, I think it was Typhoon Haiyan, there was $23 million that were raised in support of people who were in need, and some of that money was given as aid so that they could start their own businesses and put their kids through school again because they had nothing. So that's helping to lift people out of poverty, what we've never been able to do before.
Yeah, and we're also living a lot longer. And Pablo, I mean, it's quite possible the biggest company in the world in 10 years could be a biotech. I mean, the amount of the growth of some of these companies is absolutely spectacular. One of the 5 transformational themes of this panel is longevity. We're living longer, but we're demanding more medicine. What will your world look like in 2025?
I think as you've said, it's going to change a lot, and it's going to change for many reasons, but a few that come to mind are the fact that the system today is highly inefficient, very expensive.
You're talking about global health delivery?
Yes.
What's the system?
The healthcare ecosystem, and I am referring to that. When you look at countries spending anywhere between 10-12% of GDP to as high as 20% in the case of the US, or close to 20%, in delivering health to the population, it's not sustainable. And what's interesting, as we've heard in several panels today, is that we're living in a very unusual time because it's sort of as Mike was saying, sort of the tale of two cities, where you have this major challenges and high inefficiency, very expensive, but at the same time, the promise of technology and what we're seeing in this field is really remarkable. And I think what will happen, between now and then is that the technology will drive costs down significantly because it will make things much more efficient. There's too much waste in the system. When you look at data, for example, collection in healthcare, it's not linked, it's not integrated, so there's significant waste, and that will definitely change things. And you could see, going back to your question about value creation, very, very significant value creation in this industry, and maybe some really, really big companies arising from in life sciences because of the size of this industry to the world economy.
I was in the Apple store in Santa Monica a couple days ago, and there's a thermometer attachment you put into your phone. And I'm just thinking to myself, okay, in 10 years, what are we going to be able to do in healthcare that we can't even dream about today?
Okay. If I can have slide 7, and maybe I'll answer the question by very quickly sharing with you and the audience what's happened in this industry over the last, several years. And the industry has really been transformed at many levels, but science has been transformed, and what you see here is a very simple transformation that has occurred in the past. It's going to get a lot more complex as we go into the future. But where we went from, sort of an industry that was dominated by big pharma, and everything was happening within the walled gardens of big pharma, and it was simple, organic chemistry, and that led to a drug. Today, the industry is much more complex with many more disciplines, and much more dynamic and creative. But that's where we are today, and I point in this chart, and because it's a topic that I'll like to come to back later, that this new industry is one that is creating very significant licenses and royalties, because every party that is involved, every entity that is involved in this industry gets compensated with this. And the reason I'll come back to this is because this has become a way of financing the industry, monetizing these licenses and royalties. But that's what's happened over the last 30, 40 years. If you go on to the next slide, 8, what's also happened is that not only science has been transformed, but the structure of the industry has been transformed, where we have, again, we went from the fully integrated model of the model of a fully integrated pharmaceutical company to a much more dynamic and specialized industry, where we have very significant government in participation, and then biotech and big pharma. So more dynamic, more fragmented. And again, every time technology is transferred from one entity to another, you have this creation of license and royalties. To answer your question of what it's going to look like in the future, if I could have slide 11, we're going from what was in the past sort of a one-size-fits-all medicine, where many drugs and therapies were not working on many patients, where medicine was being practiced on a reactive basis, where it was based on looking at symptoms of patients, physician-centric, data not integrated, as I said, to a much more interesting future. And again, by 2025, I think what we'll see here is a market, and this was coined by Lee Hood, where what we will see is what he calls P4 medicine, which is now predictive, preventative, personalized, and participatory. And a lot of the things that all of my colleagues here are working on today will help in creating this new future where medicine will change into this much more dynamic and rich delivery of products.
Pablo, can I ask a question on this? Because I think we talk a lot about innovation, and it tends to be something that is tangible, that can be seen, that people can relate to, like what was yesterday is not today. But there's so much innovation happening, as you're showing, around business models and the economics, of traditional industries. And when I look at this, I think about the regulatory environment, and I think about legislation keeping up with these types of technologies and how that will or will not prohibit achieving this vision. I mean, can you talk about what's happening there, particularly when you look at stem cell research and pluripotent cells and all those types of things that are transpiring?
So your question is interesting, and there's actually two sides to that. And when you look at what is highlighted here, the drivers of change in the industry, there's really two, in my mind, two important drivers. One is societal, and it goes to what you were talking about, which is regulations. And there's really different actors when you talk about driving this change, when you look at society. Obviously, the patient, the providers, physicians, and then payors and regulatory. And what's really happening is that you have two forces that are sort of contradictory. One, patients that are demanding a better health and more efficient, and they're demanding it, but at the same time you have these other forces, which are regulations that create complications. So it is going to be very interesting to see how this develops over the next 10, 15 years.
Well, let's I want to get Karen and Jim in as well. So Karen, it's funny, we're talking about aging. We're going to live longer. The world is living longer. We're living 50% longer than we were just 100 years ago. With aging comes opportunity, but it's going to require a lot of capital. How do you see the demographic shift as the world gets healthier? And it is getting healthier. How does the demographic shift impact capital, technology, resource allocation?
It's interesting, Brian. You actually referenced a chart that the audience couldn't see on page 1, which are these 5 transformative themes, one of which is longevity, as we're talking about living longer, healthier lives. That means we're inheriting capital later, right? That's a good thing, but it means that part of what we're seeing in terms of wealth inequality is people living longer, accumulating capital more over their lifetime, which means it contributes to capital superabundance, more capital for investment. But I'm actually struck listening to Strive, Carrie, Pablo, about how this resonates from a thematic point, this bell curve to barbell theme, because what we're seeing in terms of business model around the world is how businesses are getting both larger and smaller. And they're relying, the new startups, many of them rely on the infrastructure of traditional businesses. PayPal, you talk about there's less cash in people's wallets, but what's in there is credit cards, right? It's not digital currency. People aren't moved to Bitcoin. They like the insurance of credit cards, the SWIFT system, the accessibility of it. When you talk about, when I was looking at your chart on pharma, Pablo, it had 100 big pharma companies and 8,500 small players, but there's a symbiotic relationship there. In telco, it's the same thing, right? You can't just drop a wireless phone, you need copper wire laid. There's a wireless tether that sits behind that. And many of the disruptive business models, things like Uber or Airbnb, rely on that, and some of them are becoming then the front-end logistics infrastructure for the next businesses, like TaskRabbit, right? So you see on the one hand Amazon, on the other hand, thousands of startups that have gone from having a smartphone replace the back office and the receptionist and the brochure and the office, and now having these large logistics providers, Amazon, UPS, replacing the front end. And it's a very interesting split as an investor, as someone watching the business environment. Who's going to be the winner on the front end? Because that requires scale and investment, and who on the back end will be enabled on the basis of the smaller players that will be enabled because of that.
Millions of apps. You know, it's like I joke with my daughter, 4 words I never want to hear you say: offers, in-app purchases. You know, the thing I like about you, Jim, is that you not only thought about this panel, you actually created a paper. So what I will do is now read the 8-page, I'm kidding. It's called Unlocking the Future of Capital Markets. So can you unlock the future of capital markets?
Yeah, I do think, Brian, and thank you for that reference, I do think that one of the few things we can really predict is the demographics and the impact of longevity. And
it may be the only thing.
It may well be, because the people that are there in 2025 will be, I mean, you know who the people are that will be over 10 years old, because they're born already. And the actuarial tables can tell you how many are likely to be born, and those numbers are actually pretty stable. Indeed, the change has been quite stable, because every 5 years, longevity increases by about a year. So I think we have a pretty good idea of the demographic profile of the population in 10 years' time. Looking at this from a financial point of view, this means there will be, in the developed world, and actually in China as well, a lot of older people who are thinking about slowing down or retiring. Now, I think the model for retirement will change. People will not retire as young as they historically did when health was worse. Looking forward with better health, working lives and the end of them will change a lot. But what this means in financial terms is there will be a lot of people trying to turn their nest egg into an income. People who retire with $1 million, that's great, but I'm going to live for the next 20 years. What I need isn't $1 million, it's 70 or 80,000 a year. Now, that problem or that issue means that there will be a lot of demand for income-producing assets. The balance in capital markets almost has to change. There's a lot of conversations at this conference about Fed policy. Will they raise rates in June or September? To be honest, I don't really care. Not just because we're on a long
Will they have raised them by 2025?
Almost for sure, but not as...
Almost sure?
But not as much as people think. And the reason I say that is older people wanting to turn their assets into income, they'll keep buying bonds. It's almost rock solid certain. And if that happens, just all those buyers will mean rates will stay lower for longer than most people
Will they be able to buy bonds through PayPal on an EcoNet phone?
Probably. I mean, they already buy money market funds in China through Yue Bao, which is the Chinese equivalent of PayPal.
The comment you make on demographics is correct here and in China and in Japan. However, if we look at sub-Saharan Africa, if we look at many of the equator nations, right?
Yep.
Indonesia,
Yep.
Egypt.
Yep.
Half the economy is under 25 years old.
That is true, but the financial impact is modest because they still won't have much money in 2025 compared with the developed world. The places where the money are will have a big demand for income-biased assets, which to me means we're in a very different period. The other thing I'd point to, us baby boomers built our careers in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. What was that? It was a period of structural excess demand in the world economy. There was inadequate pricing, there was inadequate productive capacity because of the Cold War and all sorts of other things going on, bad economic policies, you know, the socialists running India. There were all kinds of reasons why production was low. So you had excess demand at a time of low production, tendency to inflation, very high interest rates. That period up to about 1980, when rates went up to 15%, that is unique in history. We should not deduce from that that the next decade will look at all like it. This period looks more like the late 19th century, where there's structural shortfall in demand in the world economy. I don't really like Larry Summers' secular stagnation description, but that's actually what it is. It's excess supply, shortfall of demand. That is almost inevitable given technological change. So I would argue low interest rates are something we better get used to, and the aging population will need to battle that as they provide for their retirement.
And even if you believe that greater savings will come, have a positive view, some of the developments that Strive has spoken about, the buildup of capital, this capital superabundance that we're in now, is a multi-decadal phenomenon. I think there's a mythology that this is a result of the extraordinary actions of central banks, the Bank of Japan, Bank of England, the Fed, following the financial crisis. But actually it began at the end of Bretton Woods and really accelerated in the 80s and 90s. And we have this capital superabundance. A lot of supply of capital means that price is going to go down unless there's a big upsurge in demand. And I think Jim's point is that the offsetting, the blasting away of the global supply by World War II isn't going to be replaced, we hope. We're not predicting by 2025 wiping out the supply base of the world, and so luckily that we won't have that same challenge, but it means that there isn't the demand for capital. We're in a demand-constrained world.
Technologically speaking, Strive, so like this thing, right? I mean, we couldn't even really, I know Motorola invented a phone 40 years ago, et cetera, but we really didn't start using them until about 15, 20 years ago, the Blackberries, and we've sort of evolved into this. And we always talk about the future of this, but I was wondering, as you look out 10 years, do we even need a physical device anymore?
Probably not. I mean, just to lighten the moment, you are wearing this beautiful little band here. And I listened.
My wife said I was overweight.
Yeah, my wife did the same to me.
Doesn't sound right, does it, Brian?
We're both stuck with one.
Yeah, it works.
I think mine's a better brand, though. But
it makes me feel guilty every day, Strive.
But seriously speaking, if you look at the adaptation, the speed of adaptation, okay? He's wearing one, I'm wearing one. Come in 10 years, we'll all be wearing one.
I'm wearing one too.
Oh, she's wearing, there you are, except hers is more.
The only guy not wearing one is the healthcare guy.
It's interesting.
I'm wearing old-fashioned.
I'm waiting for the iWatch.
The Apple Watch
is in order.
I'm wearing old-fashioned Swiss clockwork.
But here's one of the things that you will see, which is that it will move from fitness to health.
Yeah.
Okay? We can see that now already. This product will be even talking to your doctor without you being aware of it. In 10 years' time, the amount of statistical data that a device like this will be collecting, because it is relying on your smartphone, will be phenomenal.
I don't know if you're a Star Trek fan, the old, where they used to literally just zap and they would know everything that's wrong with you.
Yeah.
We're probably, Pablo, I'm going to embarrass myself, we're probably already there. We're just talking about the product for the iPhone that takes your temperature. I mean, if we can get to a point where somebody anywhere in the world can diagnose an issue, remotely send the data somewhere, and then perhaps have it come back, to think about what might happen, especially in some of the more poor or remote regions of the world, is simply mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But Brian, I was just,
Are we there yet? Maybe we're already there.
You already have physicians in less expensive places like India or Bangladesh who are studying data from around the world and diagnosing. That actually happens today.
We're already there.
I was going to say the same thing.
We're there. It's just the complexity of it
And the cost.
And of course, even the cost will be coming down at the same time.
But I think there's a third strive, and it's about societal readiness
Correct.
and consumer readiness. It freaks a lot of people out to think about what this can do to drive behavior, to share information about themselves. And so we even see in the financial sector when you start looking at someone's identity. How do they identify themselves? What do you know about them in order to pull fraud and risk out of the financial sector? And it is about, are we ready to accept the technologies out there to change behaviors?
It doesn't feel like we are right now.
Oh, I'm not sure. I think that maybe if you ask people, they'll say, oh, no, my privacy is very important. But you say, if you stick this black box on your car, it'll be $20 a month less for insurance. Like, here, I'll stick that thing on my car, right?
exactly.
So it's like the new Coke phenomenon. If you ask
And then when you
people
wreck,
what
they'll
they'll
tell you they were
do-
speeding and you're not covered.
And
Sorry.
Karen, you make a very important point there, which is adoption is about
Exactly.
incentives.
Right.
Correct.
And this is the problem with the healthcare spending, going back to one of the things Pablo was saying earlier. If you look at, the US overspends on healthcare. It's not because we're really good at it. It's not because of technological innovation. It's because of a bad incentive structure and a lot of bureaucracy. And that will at some point change, but that's not a technological decision. When that changes is a political decision.
And,
Go ahead, Strive, sorry.
and of course, we can be very excited about technology, but we mustn't lose sight of whether it's technology taking place in the wireless sector, whether it's pharma technology, we're still dealing with people.
Yep.
And as we can see, it's also going to result in extraordinary, as much as we will see change, there are also many things where there will be no change, or battles to resist change.
Yeah.
And
Such as?
and we're already beginning to see that in certain regions of the world. Those are battles against change.
You are.
Boko Haram,
Yeah. One of the things.
translated, means
Yeah.
no to Western education. It's
One
a
of the things I've been
response to,
thinking.
we don't
sorry.
want change.
Strive. One of the things I've been thinking about in that context is driverless cars. There's 4 million
Yes,
people.
of course.
There's 4 million people in the US employed as drivers. If driverless cars really work, they'll have to find something else to do. However, there's also 30,000 people a year die in the US in traffic accidents. If driverless cars work, that slaughter won't happen anymore. So I think there's a very interesting set of
But Carrie, to your
possibilities
point-
there.
I think it was, Carrie, you mentioned the regulatory environment. It's interesting, the technology for driverless cars is here.
Yes.
But if you talk to the industry, they'll say we're way out because of the regulatory environment.
Absolutely.
But there, and listen, we do, and I'm all for change, and we want to advance the world as much as we can. But we have to admit there are some things you need to
Yeah.
take, I don't want to say slowly,
Yeah, there
but
are.
how about smartly?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the point here is that it will only be adopted when the technology appears to be reliable. And, but I would argue that society is nowadays very risk averse. And the kind of deaths and injuries that happened in the space program in the 60s would not be tolerated anymore. I think it's a total anomaly that society tolerates traffic deaths. And if the technology is available to avoid that, I believe societal pressure to adopt it, the incentive structure, will be very strong. If you're going to go and drive fast, Brian, you may have to go on a track in future, because then it will be a dangerous sport that you have to sign a disclaimer to do. Whereas if you're actually on the road, I suspect you might be able to be on the web in the back seat while the software
You don't
drives
have to
the
worry.
car.
The maximum speed on the 405 is like 12 miles an hour most times. So, Jim, it's just
But you,
bonk, you're fine.
well, you'll
But
be
we're
all
not
right
talking
with.
about 2025 here. I
Yeah.
mean, fleet adoption alone means this isn't going to be mass
Oh, no,
produced,
no.
and half of what happens in a car is what's a rare event,
Yes.
right? Like if anyone's
Yeah.
a Stanford grad, that squirrel that ran in front of your bike and froze and maximize
Yeah.
whatever accident you could have with the
Yeah.
other bike, or the wire that falls in front of your car, the things that
Yeah.
happen less than 10
No.
to a dozen times a year, that's half of what happens to you on the road. The technology is not there for that.
No,
Karen, I'm intrigued by your fifth thing. Can the audience see this?
It's slide 1.
Slide 1. There you go. Capital superabundance. Sounds like the Milken Conference.
Right.
Yep.
But what do you mean by that?
Well, Jim described it perfectly. It's the accumulation of capital that's happened over the last 3 decades. The gating function on the creation of capital was Bretton Woods, and the end of that in '73 meant there was no real ceiling on the amount of money that could be created other than the technology to count it, roughly speaking.
But I guess I'm
and even then-
confused by the demand-constrained world when
Right, so
we'll
we're-
talk about probably 12 billion people in 2025. We'll talk about half the countries in the world where the average age is under 25 years old.
But remember, before the financial crisis, the US consumed 36% of the world's output on the back of 25% of GDP. And no one has backfilled for that. And a miniature dynamic of that was happening in Europe with Germany exporting to the periphery. And some of that was some of that is demographically driven, and that people in their 45 to 60 age bracket don't consume. It's the lowest consumption as a percent of their income, their highest productivity, their highest savings as they prepare for retirement. And as we see these baby boomer groups move through, like the bulge in the snake, we see the buildup of savings in places like Germany, like Japan, 10 years ago, this wave of capital accumulation. And we're not seeing the offsetting demand. It's not to say that the demand wouldn't be there, but we don't have the redistributive mechanism to fulfill that. The same thing, by the way, is happening in the United States, right? There are plenty of, half the households, 50% of US households have income of 0 to 50,000 a year. Another 30%, 50 to 100K. All of those households would consume more if they had more income. And income for those households has stayed flat or declined. But there isn't a mechanism for moving income into their hands. It actually plays right into the point Jim made earlier about how capital assets are a wealth generator. It's a challenge, and I don't know what the right answer is. It's certainly not brute force redistribution. That's worked 0 times, but it is a challenge. So the demand may be there, but if they don't have the means to express it, then it's not valuable for creating growth.
But you know, the number of people coming into the world economic system are not enough to cause permanent shortages, given the productive capacity the world has developed. I think the history of commodities over the last decade is very interesting, because 3 or 4 years ago, the conventional view was peak oil, we're not going to find any more. We inexorably will see the demand go up. You know, we need to invest gazillions of dollars in oil extraction and metals, by the way, as well. That worked, and the money was invested, and what happens? You have a glut. That's just how economics works. Even food is in oversupply right now, which no one conventionally 3 or 4 years ago would have said was possible. Now, what that tells me is the tendency of markets to find a level to clear is just an incredibly powerful phenomenon. And it has actually saved us from the shortages that many people foolishly predicted 3 or 4 years ago.
Well, there is this amazing stat, Pablo, this is right up your alley. I mean, you know, you think that the simplistic way to look at this, say, oh my gosh, we're living longer, the world's going to be dangerously overpopulated if we increase healthcare. Every study shows the more healthy somebody is, the fewer children they have.
Right.
So by raising standards of living, both from a capital perspective and a longevity perspective, we'll actually slow any possibility of dangerous rate of growth, especially in the more overpopulated regions. So longevity and healthcare, Pablo, are actually, I don't want to say capital creator, but certainly we think of just living long, but we live better.
So
Let me guess, you have a slide for this.
well, I thought I would speculate a little bit on what healthcare could look like in 2025, and there is a slide, it's 12. So I think
12, you said?
yes.
12, slide 12, please.
So I think what's going to happen is that we're going to go again from this model of sort of disease-centric, doctor-centric to patient-centric. And what's going to happen is that patients will really become health consumers. And we were talking before about the effect of wearables. And I think in this conference, there's been quite a bit of discussion about wearables in the digital health talks. And what we will see is an amazing change in the behavior of people because of the things we talked about just a few minutes ago. Where this new sort of health consumer will really be totally quantified, understand his own health and the progression of his health over life much better than we do today. and devoting a lot of energy and time to this, and the ownership of that data is going to really empower them to demand better health, and that's why I think things will change, and they will change relatively quickly.
Yeah, the problem with that, though, is the technology clearly will exist to do exactly what you're describing, Pablo. What I don't see happening is the incentive structure and the organization to make it happen. And I actually am quite pessimistic about the changes that are likely in the incentive structure, because if anything, I mean, your point about the change of pharma structures, I drew a very clear message from that. Big pharma is too bureaucratic to innovate. That's why they need all these biotech startups that can then monetize themselves. The incentive structure in the organization is the impediment to this patient-centric, consumer-centric healthcare.
I think it's going to happen not only, see, the thing to realize is that we're talking about a big world where there's a lot has been said about how many countries adopt things much more quickly, like what we have seen in Africa and some areas of technology. And this devices will exist, they will be adopted, perhaps quicker in other places. And I think it's going to be a lot as a result of cost. And the incentives are not there today, but the problem is that when you see healthcare growing like it's growing in this country, it's just not, we can't afford it.
No, we can't.
So what will happen also is this new conversion, between all of the sort of providers of health into this accountable care organizations, where the focus is going to be not, as has been said many times, volume, but outcomes. And so it will happen in my mind, and it's going to change a lot of things. For example, things will become cheaper if you start to realize that what will happen is a lot of the health, because we're going to be talking about prevention and wellness, is going to happen at home. Patients will monitor themselves, will monitor their behavior.
Can we handle that? I mean, anybody in here a doctor? I don't need one, I'm just curious.
Yeah, there must be.
You talk to doctors, they say, my God, WebMD is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, because everybody comes in and says, I'm having a heart attack, or no, whatever. But it's like, no, you got a little indigestion, you're gonna be fine. Are we gonna be able to, I was thinking about the Apple Watch, and you're waiting for one. I don't know if I wanna know my heart rate all the time, especially mine, right? So I just wonder, are we gonna be able to handle this, Pablo? Do we want to know all this about ourselves?
But Pablo, can I
Sure.
ask onto that as well? Because I wouldn't disagree with anything that you're predicting. I do tend to agree with Jim, though, and I think that it dovetails off of what Brian's saying, is that where's the why in it? How do we understand what's going to drive the consumer behavior to adopt these things and to want to share more information? Because there needs to be some incentive back, and it's the same around the world. I mean, yeah, you've got social medicine in some countries, which makes a lot of sense. But I'm struggling with, where does the behavior start to change? How does that change?
Well, we can handle it. And I'll tell you why. In the early days of the cell phone industry, when I go back, I sometimes, I'm too polite to remind some of my friends what they used to say to me about why they shouldn't have a cell phone back in the early 90s. And they would say things like, well, I need, will people be in meetings like this with their cell phones on? They'll have to switch them off because it's rude. I mean, you see, we look at things, we frame the future with the lens that we have today.
That's true.
Our children are digitized completely. You know that. They will handle this change. You just said if you look at Africa, 60% of our population is under the age of 30. Boy, they're already in the change.
Yes.
They live change. I mean, I'm an engineer, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I sit in front of the television, I want to watch sports, I call her in, I say, can you change the channel for me? Because I don't know how this TV works. And she kind of walks in and says, okay, Dad, and walks away. And I'm sure many of us, if we want to be honest, know that to be true. So we can handle the change, but we tend to see the future with today's lens. but the lens itself also
Okay.
changes.
So again, I like audience participation, unlike other moderators. How many people in here, honestly, just raise your hands, we can't see you, there's all these lights, would say they, quote, couldn't live without their smartphone? Like they couldn't operate
yeah.
day to day without their smartphone. Okay, so yeah, a good number of hands. And
So anybody not got their hands up?
what's amazing about, for the other half are lying,
Yeah.
what's amazing about it,
That could be it.
let's not forget the iPhone is only 7 years old.
That's right.
Exactly.
And half the audience, some of the most sophisticated and intelligent people in the world sitting in this audience, you're welcome, can't live without something that didn't
Exactly.
exist 7 years
That's
ago.
right.
And go further, none of you, I would guess, maybe one, maybe less than 10%, have a doctor who knows enough about your life and lifestyle to, when you come in, say, yeah, I understand why you're thinking this, but knowing how you live, you're probably overtired, or it's probably your diet, right? You probably maybe spend 7 minutes a year with your doctor if you go in for a regular appointment, but 90% of you sleep with your smartphone next to your bed. We're not going to ask you to raise your
And
hand.
they will read, they will check that phone
Yeah.
within 3 minutes of getting up.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
That
they
long?
And they didn't have it. And they didn't
They have to put
have
their
it
glasses
7
on.
years ago.
So strive. In 2025, what will we not be able to live without, and I mean live without, that we don't even know we need today? That's what Apple's genius was. They didn't create a phone. They created a need.
A friend, really.
And Android and BlackBerry.
Yeah.
Here. BlackBerry's here. John Chen was on the show today.
Well, you
You know what I mean. I'm just using Apple as a proxy.
You know the story that in 2025, in the plane, the pilot, there will be in the cockpit, there will be a pilot and a dog.
Who's flying?
And the dog will be there to make sure that the pilot doesn't touch anything.
Yeah.
Pilotless planes. Effectively.
Well, the pilot will be there to give you the comfort, but the dog will be there to make sure the pilot
Yeah,
doesn't do
I would feel pilotless planes are not going to happen for quite a long time.
Yes.
They already
Maybe-
exist.
No, but for freight, for drones, I doubt if, and I rather like the fact that there's someone there who survives if I do, who's in charge.
That's
And I don't see that changing, actually,
No,
for
and that's
passenger
exactly
planes
why
anytime soon. I'm a big enthusiast for driverless cars. I think that's going to happen. But that's so much simpler than pilotless planes.
But the thing is, all we can say about 2025 with certainty is there's nothing that's sacred to disruption.
No.
The yellow cab has been disrupted by Uber. Okay, who would have thought that,
That's true.
the limousine driver is working for Uber now,
Yep.
even for the billionaire?
Yep.
Who would have thought that would happen?
It's true.
So the disruption will take
Yes.
place, every industry, everything, and that's where the entrepreneurs will come through. I think even your concern about the incentives, that is actually the window for the entrepreneurs.
Yes. That's
They
true.
come through to create the incentive structures like Apple to drive the adaptation.
Yes, and
And
that's
PayPal.
That's true in areas where it's not as political as healthcare has been demonstrated to be in this country, in this administration. And whatever you think of the Affordable Care Act, whatever direction it had changed in, it was going to get politically bogged down because people have their own ideas.
And you think about money, Carrie. I mean, you used to, obviously, cash a check, right? I mean, you think about especially in very, parts of the world where you don't have the system of credit or capital that you might have here, the sophistication. Being able to, and I hate to keep coming back to the phone, but progress is probably one of the other things we can definitively say. The ability with people to change their life, I don't mean buy something, change their life because they now have access to credit and capital that they never had before, and they're 500 miles away from the nearest bank.
Yep.
It's pretty incredible.
It is, and I think to your point, and I love that not to buy, it's not just about commerce, right? It's bettering people's lives, and it's helping society evolve and mature in markets where they haven't been able to. Even in the US, there's a large population of people who live paycheck to paycheck. It's this emerging middle class. And if they had a few dollars in order to span that bridge, I mean, their opportunity in order to be more productive and to participate in the economy would be huge. And I think about the phone, and I think about even what's happening in Nepal, unfortunately, over the last couple days. And you think about the innovation from Facebook and Twitter and others to identify that you're okay.
And the ability to send help.
And the ability,
Capital,
to
money,
send
supply,
help,
whatever
and
it is.
the ability to mobilize collection of donations at no
Yep.
cost in order to redistribute it to those in need, because we aren't experiencing that. And that's where mobility and capital and funds, I think, are being disruptive, and it's helping this place be better and the world a better place besides just consumption.
Technology takes us so far, but there is something else that intrigues me about how we might be in 10 years' time. And Karen and I started an argument about this on the prep call.
It was very polite, though.
It was a very polite argument, a very interesting, constructive one. But my question really is, does the trend towards urbanization in the developing world and re-urbanization in the developed world continue? I find it's quite extraordinary. If you look around America, around Europe, the development is now concentrated in downtown areas. We own a lot of property in Manhattan. The tenants we're getting now are very different to what they used to be. They're app developers, they're software writers. They're not lawyers and traders necessarily in Lower Manhattan. What that tells me is there is a huge change going on here. Younger people find suburbs boring. Younger people are living in the big cities where there is the sophisticated entertainment infrastructure that they want and where they can get home fast to go online. You see the effect of this in New York, where if you compare residential property in Midtown with residential property out in the suburbs, the price change has been huge because of demand for being downtown, Midtown. And I think there is a chance, because of the social change behind this, that this continues and that we end up with a much more urbanized population in 10 years' time than we have now.
And my counter to that was that this is the millennials who aren't having babies yet. Average maternal age is 29 or 30, and that when people start to have children, their desire to be near nightclubs versus their desire to be near swing sets shifts dramatically.
Yeah,
Depending on the time of day.
Depending on the time of day.
It depends
Actually,
it also depends on where the medical facilities and the daycare centers
Well,
are.
Schools and
Well,
But
okay,
this
let's-
is where Strive's going to fix this,
know.
right? If you
You're gonna
look
fix
at
this?
yes, we'll look
Yeah.
at I'm going to call up slide 3. I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm forced to because I think this gets to spatial economics,
Yep.
right? What
Okay,
do we
hold on.
believe is
What
gonna
is what is
happen?
spatial economics?
It's a so we call this spatiality. This is a terrible name. If anyone has a suggestion, it reminds me of now people nickname their babies in utero things, and it's all cute until little Zeus is actually toddling around the playground. That's where we are with this. So spatiality or spatial economics, the decline in the costs of moving people, moving things, moving ideas, moving currency, declining dramatically. It's the biggest technological change we have. It's thanks to you. It's thanks to Carrie. It's all of these things. And the question is, at what point is the tipping point where people no longer need to be clustered to get the access to the things that they
Yes.
want? Labor no longer, having big pools of labor is going away. We're automating that away. That's capital substitution. It's not an advantage in the world.
But those same millennials may want to take their 10-year-olds to sporting events in the theater. Those are things kids kind of like. And in a more prosperous society, I would suspect there is at least a good chance that the intensity of the urban centers continues to increase at the expense of the suburbs.
Maybe, but not at the expense of the exurbs, right? I mean, this is
No, the
this
country
the
is
question,
different. The country
right?
is a place for leisure. It's a place where you're away from work, and that will still have attractions.
Do people, Pablo, will people matter in 20? We've talked a lot about transformational change and moving money around. And what's amazing to me is no matter what happens, the Milken Conference grows in attendance every year despite the ticket prices.
And
You know
we're
what
all
that
in
tells
one
me?
we're all in one tiny space, Brian.
But you know what that tells me? It tells me that people still matter more
Yeah,
than ever, maybe.
exactly.
it's all about people.
I say this
Exactly.
to anybody that knew that joins my production staff of my show. one phone call is worth 50 emails and one handshake is worth 50 phone calls.
Yep.
I've never made a relationship over email. I keep them going,
Yep.
but I've never built a meaningful relationship.
That's right.
Every year I fly across country here
Yeah.
and meet a bunch of really interesting people. How much will humans
Exactly.
matter, Pablo, in 2025?
Video conferencing is great so long as you know the person on the other end. If you
It's
don't
funny,
know them,
video
it's no
conferencing
good.
has proliferated, but air travel is at a record high.
Exactly.
People are still going to meet other human beings.
Exactly.
Totally in agreement. It's all about humans. And I mean, I think healthcare will also,
Yeah.
How will humans fit into the health, other than requiring it, how will we fit into your vision for pharma and healthcare in 2025? What will a doctor be?
so one of the things I was trying to speculate on, and this idea of home health, and things like telemedicine, where patients are going to interact with doctors remotely, and obviously the question that we just discussed is they need to know the doctor, right? But once you know the doctor, a lot of interaction will happen sort of virtually through telemedicine. And there's examples of that today. There's a company that developed a service where through your iPhone you can get diagnosed. And what they're actually demanding is that your iPhone has a camera, which all do, but smartphones in general have cameras. So they can take a picture of your throat and diagnose simple things.
So your phone will do an MRI.
Quickly, efficiently. Well, talking about MRI, actually recently I met a company that is now at a stage where they have MRIs that, whole body MRIs that would take, with conventional technology, about more than an hour and a half for whole body, can get them down to about 6 minutes. And what that really will do is that MRIs will become a diagnostic, where patients will have yearly MRIs to see what's going on and move towards this prevention of sickness, really focus on wellness.
That's your next product, the home MRI kit, Strive?
Well, look, the prophet was Moore. Moore's law is still solid and sound.
It
It
is.
gets
That's
cheaper,
true.
it gets smaller, it gets faster and quicker.
Yep.
So that we know. We're not talking 21, 25. So
No.
a lot of the things we can begin to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at an area where we intersect, which is payment system, just to give you, for example, rural farmers in Africa today are using cell phones
Yep.
to get market information.
That's right.
They are using cell phones to know when to plant, to tell them what the weather data is.
That's right.
In the deepest parts of Africa.
Yeah.
We talk about financial inclusion. I was born in Zimbabwe. Many of you know that Zimbabwe went through one of the greatest hyperinflations in recorded history. The inflation hit 500 billion%. Have you heard about it since? Well, it disappeared. The inflation is under 1%. They dollarized.
Yep.
But here's the thing. Over 50% of the Zimbabwean population do all their transactions on their mobile phones.
Yeah.
It's the highest.
50%.
Yes, it's the highest in the world.
And and because they're young, they'll never not do that.
Well, that was one of the solutions.
It's a
So
learned behavior.
people
That's
will
right.
innovate, and people realize they don't trust money. Not if you've been through 500 billion% hyperinflation. You will not trust
Can you
paper
send
money.
that much on PayPal? Like, does it are there
500
enough
million?
zeros?
Yeah, no,
6
but-
trillion has been sent.
Why don't you give it a shot?
So they got rid of their currency,
Yeah.
adopted the US dollar as their currency, but over 50% of their transactions, people buy milk, send kids to school, they get on the bus, all using their mobile phones.
And I just,
And they have no inhibitions about it.
yeah.
More
and
than
I-
70% of the population have used mobile payment systems.
Yeah.
Now, how's that for a...
70%.
Yeah,
That's
in 3 years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and-
How's that for
that's a
adaptation?
fascinating example.
Jim, I
of-
just want to add to this, though, because
Sorry.
I think it's
Yeah.
really important, particularly when we're sitting in the U.S., we
Yeah.
tend to be quite myopic
Yeah.
in the way
Yes.
that we look at the world. And I will say,
Yeah.
coming from the Valley, you tend to be quite myopic in thinking that everybody who lives in the Valley is a prototype of everybody else you want to be in service to. And I completely agree with you. You look at Turkey, and you look at Brazil, and you look at the demographics of those that are native Turkey, 30 years old or lower, doing everything with mobile device. Brazil 2 years ago, we were concerned about building products for feature phones. Now forget it. I mean, it's skipped all to smartphones. There's no need to do that anymore. So this pace of change and this relationship, not just with money, is being transformative. But I do want to comment on will humans matter?
Yes.
I think humans are going to matter. I think.
I hope so.
Well, and technology has moved to a point where it's almost become impersonal. So we're trying to use technology to recreate those personal experiences that we used to have. And I think because humans will matter, how do we enable their lives so that they can recapture some of their time back to do the things that actually are meaningful for them versus living the chaos of data and information in which we live?
I think that's a good place to wrap it up. I mean, listen, I think that we've established that capital is being dispersed in part by stuff that you've done, Strive, and your company is doing, Carrie, and that's improving healthcare and people's lives because they've got more access to more, not to consume, not to absorb more, but to know more, to give more, to learn more. And Jim, I look forward to riding in a driverless car one day with you to your urban landscape.
You're probably watching CNBC.
We didn't talk about the future of TV. I'm not good at speaking at that.
Don't forget, the dog will be there. In the driverless car.
When I see that, then I'll know. So I'm going to think of you, Strive, that you were right. Karen, Carrie, Pablo, Strive, Jim, really interesting panel. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.